Good morning, folks, and welcome to this Vimy Ridge oak planting ceremony. Welcome to St. Peter's Parish and to St. Peter's Cemetery. Today we have the honor of having different individuals with us for the special ceremony of the planting of a Vimy Oak seedling. Thankfully, we have local MLA Dominique Carty, who's taken time out of what we know is a busy schedule to be with us today. Also, we have Jim Landry, the Executive Director of Landscape New Brunswick, who is here and kindly brought us the Vimy Oak. And last but not least, Bob Dallison, retired Lieutenant Colonel in the Canadian military, and he's going to be our historian today to tell us about the gentleman who's buried behind me, Captain Clements, who fought at the actual Battle of Vimy Ridge and also was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery on that occasion. But today we recall the Battle of Vimy Ridge and, of course, Delancey Clements, but also it's time for us to recall and also to mark that there were other Canadians who fought at that battle, some who haven't gotten their historic due. The First Nation soldiers, of which there were thousands who fought in the Great War and who came back to Canada and did not enjoy all the full privileges of citizenship in the country for which they had fought. We recall them today as well and make up for that historic deficit. Also, members of this congregation, which was rather considerably a black congregation, with 1/3 or 1/4 of the congregation of St. Peter's at that time being of black heritage and descendants from slaves, they also served. And over here is a Howe gentleman and also a Leek gentleman who served not in the construction battalion, but in regular battalions overseas during the Great War. So we recall their contributions as well as we plant this Vimy Oak tree. I'm glad you all were able to make it out today. I welcome you all, and we shall proceed with our program. Please rise for the singing of O Canada.
Attention! Slow, arm.
O Canada, a home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons' command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Slow, arm. Order, arm. Stand down, E.
I'll now call upon our first speaker, MLA Dominique Carty.
It's great to be here this morning. Difficult times for our province again, but still wonderful to be able to come out on a Saturday morning and the rain's held off, to be able to gather together in brief moments of fellowship, to think that in this time of COVID are even more appreciated and important than they might have been before. And we go through right now a period of sacrifice, not unlike the sacrifices demanded of this country in a time of war, except for this time the battle is here at home and all around us. And all of us having to make sacrifices every day with distance from loved ones, routines disrupted, not being able to go to church regularly and in the same way, not being able to live the lives that those young men fought for over 100 years ago and fought for again 20 years after that in the Second War, and has stood up for the rights that we enjoy in different desolate spots around the world in the years since. I think most recently of our troops who lost their lives in Afghanistan and the struggle there for people now left to fend for themselves despite the best efforts of our brave servicemen and women. But this is I think a moment to remember that war from over 100 years ago. The young men and women who went and served. As Reverend Hebb said, in some cases men who came back and didn't enjoy the rights that they had fought for. But one of the things that marks our country is that we learn from our mistakes and we improve. We forever strive to become a more perfect reflection of God's creation. And as we do that, we've worked through some of those struggles, fully recognizing the rights of Black New Brunswickers, Black Canadians. And we're still on that path towards reconciliation when talking about our First Nations communities. But we will get there, because that's what we do as Canadians. It's what we do as the citizens of a democracy. And we can see that now in our struggle against COVID-19. The reason why this is such a terrible disease for us is because we all make the sacrifices. We have a public healthcare system, which we have to protect. Some parts of the world where I had the chance to work many years ago, those places have no healthcare systems, and people there are no consequences to COVID-19 because those who are wealthy were able to receive protection and those who are poor just don't. And that's just the way things are. Here, we expect that the least amongst us will get the same care as the wealthiest and most powerful. And that, I think, if anything, is what Major Clements fought for and what all the men and women who served under our country's flag have fought for. So it's a real honor to be here today as the MLA for Fredericton West Hamwell and as for Minister of Education as well, and bring greetings on behalf of the province of New Brunswick. I'm really looking forward to hearing about the history of the Vimy Oak and a little bit about the tree itself, the history behind Major Clements. And thank you to all those who have served, who are serving our country, and all of you for continuing to do your part to get our country and our province through the latest and what will always be an endless series of crises that affect humanity. But all we can do, I think, is look at how we act in these weeks, months, and years. History will judge us on how we behave, and so far New Brunswickers have shown themselves again, as we have during times of war, to be some of the best people in the whole world. And I'm honored to be a New Brunswicker. Thank you all for being here today, and looking forward to the rest of the service. Thank you, Dr. Rhoda. Reverend Doc.
Thank you. I'd like to call now upon Jim Landry, the Executive Director of Landscape New Brunswick, to explain the Vimy Oak initiative, the Vimy Oak trees, and this seedling which stands before us. Jim.
Thank you. So my name's Jim Landry, and I'm with Landscape New Brunswick. And you'll notice I have a little pin on here. I spent last week bicycling across Prince Edward Island to raise money for the Alzheimer's Society. So we've got Lest We Forget and we've got Forget Me Not all tied together in one little story. So that's kind of cool. I've got so many stories to tell you that these little seedlings have brought to me. I can't do that. So this will be like the part in the Willie Nelson concert where he does a medley of his hits. So I'll just mention some things. And I will give you the story of the tree, but some of the moments that this tree has brought to me over the past 3 or 4 years. I had the opportunity to plant a tree in Arras in France. My initial intent was to plant one at Vimy Ridge as part of the project that these trees were raising money for. And that's the Centennial Park, that if you go to Vimy and you're standing on the ridge and you're looking at the monument, look to the left and you'll see quite a significant park. And there's 125 oak trees there that are grown from acorns that 100 years prior to that were sent from Vimy Ridge by a soldier, Lieutenant Leslie Miller, to his farm in Scarborough, Ontario. And Leslie survived and moved home and grew up in the shade of these giant trees. And his next door neighbor, Monty McDonald, also grew up, and Leslie was kind of a mentor for him. and Monty got the idea probably 6 years ago that why don't we repatriate these trees back to Vimy Ridge. So that's what the Vimy Oak Legacy Project was all about. I jumped in late just when I heard that they were going to be sending them across Canada to various legions or schools or any place that wanted to plant them. And I thought I needed to be part of that because the work that I'm involved with. I've always been a landscape horticulturalist, and I'm proud to do that. My great uncle was killed at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and that's kind of got the other component to what got me started to do all this. I wanted to do something to honor him and my family. I was fortunate that I could be the first family member to ever visit his gravesite in France. In fact, I had in my possession his wooden cross, his wooden grave marker. It was in my garage for a number of years. In fact, it was in my presence for my entire life, and I never recognized the significance of it until I talked to a friend who's he's not a bit of a military historian, he is a military historian. And when I told him I had my great uncle's wooden cross, he said, "No, you don't." And I went on to prove him wrong. I showed it to him, and he said, "This belongs in the War Museum." So my wife Teresa and I went to Ottawa and presented it to General Vance, who's in the news a lot lately. I had a happy visit with him, and we presented it through him to the Canadian War Museum, and that's where it is now. So that's the story of the Vimy Oaks up until last year, when I thought, I can't let this go. I have to continue the process. I have to continue to tell the story. So it's not me that tells the story, it's these acorns. I just picked these off the tree that's across from the cenotaph on Queen Street. This is the time of year that I harvest them. I've done it for 2 years. I missed a couple of years because one of those years I was in France planting a tree with some school children in Arras. And just one of the greatest moments of my life, other than, family things, getting married and having children. So every year in the fall, I go around and I collect these acorns. I have the Sussex Tree Nursery last year germinated them for me. Even though I'm a landscape horticulturalist, I can't germinate these things. My success rate is pretty poor. Theirs is almost 100%. So this spring, I was rewarded with 80 little seedlings just like this. And I can't bring myself to cull out the bad ones and keep the good ones. I want to see them all put in the ground. Next Wednesday is National Tree Day. I've taken it upon myself to make it National Tree Week. Next year, maybe I'll move that up to National Tree Month. So my ambitious goal was to plant 25 of these next week. 5 different schools in 5 days. So I'm not sure I can do that, and COVID's kind of interfering with that a little bit, but really what it's about is me making the attempt to do it. And I'm going to tell the schools, if we have a tree schedule for Wednesday and we can't do it, we'll do it the next week. But in my heart, I can still feel like I've moved this National Tree Day to National Tree Week. That's my main ambition, because we have the ability now to fix all the mistakes that we made in the past 20 years by planting trees. I think it's the single most important thing that we can do. We have the tools, but do we have the will to do it? Prime Minister Trudeau wants us to plant 2 billion trees. And I know some people, when you hear that, the planting of 2 billion trees, you think of a forestry campaign where we're going to plant 2 billion trees in the forest. For me, 1 billion of those have to be in the urban canopy, and it's because that's where people live. So it's not just about planting trees and allowing the trees to help us remediate some of the problems that we have and capture water and replenish the air and sequester carbon. That message has to boil down to the people that live underneath them, which are the citizens of our urban areas, which is where virtually we all live. I don't know anybody that lives in the forest. I know people who work in the forest, but not anybody that lives in there. So I think that's important, and that's why my campaign is to get as many schools involved, because that's where it has to start. I mean, we're passing this whole planet over to the next generation, and I know in a lot of cases, especially in North America, there's not a clear understanding of the importance of trees and what they do for us. So this is one lone tree. In fact, it counters my campaign to get as many native trees planted as we can. This isn't a native tree, but my point is it's okay to plant an exotic tree. This tree is from Northern Europe. It's okay to do that, but don't forget about native trees. Have this as a focal point and allow it to tell the story that it so badly wants to tell, and then work with your native plants when you're planting things in your municipalities and your developments, or even in your own backyard, because that's the food web. So this guy isn't necessarily part of the food web, but he is very much part of our history. I noticed the lead line on the document that Ross sent out. What exactly did it say? Hope and remembrance?
A tree of remembrance, a tree of hope.
Tree of remembrance and a tree of hope. And not all trees are trees of remembrance. I think they're all trees of hope. This one kind of stands at the intersection of hope for the future, hope that it'll grow, hope for peace, hope that we can solve some of these problems. But it's also looking back. Looking back over 100 years where it started as a little acorn. So this is the next generation of Vimy Oak. And I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to be part of this in a very selfish way. This is about my Uncle John, my great Uncle John. That's the story that I hear myself tell as I talk to you people. You're thinking about your own relatives. Even when I'm planning with small children, there's always that connection. We don't have to bore down very far before some of the kids will speak up and say, my father was in the military, my grandfather was in the military, and you don't have to go down too much further again to find that there's a direct connection with the First World War or with the battle at Vimy Ridge. That's our whole country has been built around the history that's taken place since that battle. It's so much a part of who we are. Every community that has a cenotaph, no matter how big or how small, they've got a cenotaph with the names of some of the people that were there that went overseas to fought, just like my great uncle did. It's very typical of his generation. I'll tell you one tiny quick story. One of the very first trees that I planted with the Legion in Norton, New Brunswick, it was cold and it was raining, and I love planting trees in the rain. I feel sorry for some of the middle-aged and older people, but to get kids out in the rain planting trees, you can't do better than that. So when we planted this tree in Norton, it was raining and it was cold. It was in April, and I said, why don't you guys just go inside, start on your coffee and tea, and I'll dig the hole and I'll plant the tree, and you guys can come out for the ceremonial tossing of the last shovelful of soil. And no, sir. No. I had a 92-year-old gentleman help plant the tree in the rain. I got a picture of us. We're both soaking wet. When we did go inside, he was telling a story about his grandfather. No, his father. He was telling a story about his father who was gassed during the First World War, and he couldn't finish the story. And I thought, that's 100 years later, and he's 100 years old, or he's in his 90s, and he can't tell the story without breaking down. So that was early on, and that's what's kept me involved, is all of these little stories that these little trees have brought to me. So he needs your help. The tree does. He or she. You have to watch for deer, and we have to keep the whippersnapper away from them. That kills more trees than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's good to hear your passion and your devotion to this particular cause, and how it all fits into both contemporary issues of concern for our environment and planting of trees, and also that's connected intimately with our own national history and the story of every local community here in our great nation. Now I will call upon our resident historian, Bob Dallison, to tell us about a particular Vimy Ridge veteran and soldier. Bob.
We're standing near the grave of Captain Francis Delancey Clements. That's appropriate. He's a survivor of Vimy Ridge. Clements was born on the 3rd of December, 1872. He was baptized in the Douglas Anglican Church, and as his name denotes, Delancey Clements, his family had strong loyalist roots. Both those families were prominent Frederictonian loyalists. Appropriately, he got involved with the military very early in his life. As early as 1902, he was taking leadership training at a military camp at Camp Sussex. He served in a cavalry unit called the Hussars. But when the First World War broke out, he was a member of the 3rd Canadian Garrison Artillery stationed in St. John. In the fall of 1915, he was appointed as the recruiting officer for Queens and Sudbury counties. And as a result, you would have found him as a major speaker in a big rally in the village of Gagetown. On the 16th of August 1916, he resigned his militia commission and he joined the regular force. He joined what is known as the Canadian Expeditionary Force, ready to serve in France. His attestation paper is an interesting read. It tells us that he was a married man. His occupation was broker. He lived in Highlands in the city of Fredericton. He was 6'1", black hair, brown eyes. But the thing that's really interesting is his age. He was appointed to the 24th Infantry Battalion as a lieutenant. Usually, new recruits, and particularly young officers, were young men, late teens, early 20s. Clements was 42 years old. He would have been an ancient man in his battalion. His peers would have considered him as a real old man. He joined the 24th Battalion, and the 24th Battalion had the name of Victoria Rifles of Canada. I can attest to you it was the finest regiment that ever came out of Montreal. And I can say that even though it is my family regiment. My grandfather, my father, two uncles, my brother and I all served in that regiment. But he was originally, when he was recruited, he joined the 104th Infantry Battalion. He didn't last very long in that battalion. 3 months later, he was transferred to the 140th Battalion. 1 year later, he was on his way to England. When the 140th Battalion reached England, it was broken up and the officers and men were sent as reinforcements to other regiments. And Clements joined the 24th Battalion. On the 16th of November, 1916, he joined the battalion in the field in France. When he arrived, the battalion, like most of the Canadian regiments, were busy trying to recover from the Somme campaign. They suffered heavy casualties. Once they were reorganized, they then began to prepare for the Battle of Vimy Ridge. On the 9th of April, in a snowstorm, 1917, the Canadians attacked, and the 24th Battalion was one of the original assaulting battalions on that day. They suffered 230 men casualties. And Lieutenant Clements won the coveted Military Cross for courage. I can do no better than to read the official citation for his Military Cross. It's for Lieutenant Francis Delancey Clements. It's dated April 1917. For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, he led his platoon with great skill and courage, capturing 200 Germans. Throughout, he displayed an utter disregard for personal safety and a splendid example to his men. What's really fascinating, he earned this badge, this medal, at the age of 43. His war was not over at the end of this battle. He continued to serve with the 24th. Right after the battle, the Canadians held a defensive position at the foot of the Vimy Ridge. There was no major action, but the Germans shelled and bombarded his line continuously. On the 20th of April, 1917, the Victoria Cross, or the Victoria Rifles, were subjected to a very heavy bombardment, the Germans using gas shells. Clements got a big whiff of the gas and immediately felt the effects: shortage of breath, upset stomach. But he refused to go to the sick parade, to go and get medical help. He remained with his battalion for another 2 weeks. It wasn't until the battalion was relieved and taken out for rest that on the 7th of May 1917 he finally went on sick parade with heavy fevers, is what it said. One day later he was sent to a Canadian hospital at Rouen, France. 6 days later he was sent to London, England, to a hospital there. The speed in which he was evacuated tells you precisely what an ill man this was, and the fact that he remained with his men until the very end. In London, he faced the military medical board, and the board concluded that Clements was unable to continue his military service, and they recommended that he be returned to Canada as quickly as he can. 13th of July 1917, he was in Liverpool, boarding SSS Olympic, sailing for Canada. 8 days later, he arrived in Halifax. In Halifax, he faced another medical board, 3 doctors, and the board reported on 2 things. First, he was still unfit for military service, and second, he was unlikely to be able to earn a livelihood. He was sent to a convalescent hospital in St. John. The 26th of April 1918, he was released from the Canadian Armed Forces. He died in 1958 at the age of 84. His service with the combat service was quite short, only about 14 months. But in that period, at that age, he showed conspicuous gallantry, self-sacrifice, and devotion to duty. He is one of Fredericton's war heroes. Thank you. I'll place a poppy on his grave.
Thank you very much, Bob, for that detailed and precise biography and military story of Captain Clements. It's quite extraordinary, being gassed as he was, that he lived to the age that he did, which is a tribute, I guess, in part at least to his constitution. I'd ask if Jim would come up now, please, and we could we're going to have 2 separate events. One is a ceremonial planting of the Vimy Oak, and then after that we'll have the unveiling of the plaque. So we'll have those as 2 separate moments and photo opportunities for those of you with cameras.
Thank you. So you want me just
Just move that as you need to.
okay? And we'll have someone throw some ceremonial soil over it.
Bob, would you like to throw the ceremonial soil? Please?
I'll be a minute.
I thought you were going to want me to dig.
No.
Oh, no. The hole has been pre-dug by Jim.
Yeah.
He's curled before, as he told us. He's done this routine before and knows the way to do it.
And it's the one thing that's different here that I really enjoy when I'm planting trees with kids is I get them to do all this. I mean, there's several points to this process of getting this tree in the ground, and one of them is to get kids to get their hands dirty. And it's even better when it's raining. I've had some wonderful moments watching kids play in the dirt, some for the first time. I understand there's safety aspects to things, and we need to be careful, but we also need to allow kids to learn about this sort of stuff and what it takes. And I talk to them about the soil. I mean, this is really sandy soil, so I've added some compost to it. As you know, oak trees grow really, really big. They live a long time. It's interesting that the botanical name for this, and we have a couple of other horticulturists in the audience, so I'll be careful, but this is Quercus robur. Quercus meaning oak and robur meaning strength. So the fact that it's got this connection with the Canadian military and Vimy Ridge and my great uncle, I think it's pretty appropriate. So last year this was an acorn, and now it's got a substantial root system. It's quite healthy. So I'll place it we have to be careful when we plant trees. This will be a lesson you can take home with you when you're planting trees in your own yard. Depth is really important. We often plant trees too deep or too shallow. There's a little root flare where the trunk grows into the ground. That has to be exposed. We don't want the bark to rot. We also don't want it elevated so that the whole thing just acts as a wick and sucks all the moisture out of the ground. So that's where we're at. If you'd like to throw the ceremonial soil over it. I don't know where, there's a little bit on this side. Okay.
I think I got the easy part.
Yeah, I think we've all got the easy part. Anybody else?
No, I'm all right. Well,
Okay. So are you going to do the plaque?
yeah, Dominique and I are going to do the plaque. We're now going to have the second photo op and the second stage of this, which is Dominique and I will unveil the plaque, which marks the Vimy Oak, and also hopefully makes it very clear to the lawnmowers and everybody else that there's something special here, folks. A clothespin on each side, and then we'll just lift it up. Clothespin off, and up we go. You never knew clothespins were quite so handy.
At one of the plantings that I did in St. John at a school, we had some people from the Legion there, some veterans, and we had a lot of the kids from the school, and they were all standing around when we were planting the tree. And I asked them the question, so what happens if this tree dies? And I waited a full 10 seconds, and a little girl in the front said, we plant another one. And I thought, you got exactly the point that I was trying to make. So trees are about hope, so never give up hope. If it dies, just plant another one. And now actually it gives you the opportunity. I told you the story about planting the tree in Norton, New Brunswick with the Legion there. That tree was fantastic. I looked at it every time I went to Sussex. It was huge, it was that big around, and then it was hit by a car. So as sad as that is, we got the opportunity to go back and tell the story all over again 3 years later with a new group of people. Some of the original people weren't there, but there was a new group of people. So it's an opportunity. It's a hopeful opportunity. Sorry.
No. Thank you, Jim. That sort of ad-libbing makes this sort of event very special. Just before I begin my closing remarks today, I'd like to thank Doug Hall and the two young gentlemen who are here from the downtown historic properties, the Officer Square, and the program there this summer. These two young gentlemen are on their own time today. They're university students. They volunteered to come here today, wear a period costume, and constitute the honor guard. So we certainly thank them and Doug for their presence here today. Thank you. Just a closing remark before we have God Save the Queen. Cemeteries are much more than places of Christian burial. Cemeteries are places that contain, record, and display our story, our own history. When it comes to military history, this particular cemetery contains the remains of veterans of the War of 1812-14, veterans of both World Wars, the Great War and the Second World War, and also a veteran from Vietnam. So if you just walk around the cemetery, you can see that sort of thing here. And there's a story not just about who's buried here, but the history of the country and the transformations that took place over the course of time. If one was even a little bit more studious in walking the cemetery, you could learn other things about history. You could learn things about our social history. Over there is buried a lady who's recorded on the tombstone as being a consort of a second-generation loyalist. Also, if you knew enough about those who are buried here, the cemetery contains the records of various periods of unwellness within our society. Families struck by diphtheria, victims of the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, people who suffered from polio later on in history. If we just have the knowledge and take the time, cemeteries tell an extraordinary story of our nation, of our community, of our resilience and of our struggles in the past, and also, as we learn from Captain Delancey Clements, of our victories and of our triumphs in the face of adversity. All those things are contained in a cemetery, and certainly one here like at St. Peter's, where we have recorded burials since 1816, there's a great deal of history here, a great number of stories that are contained herein, a great deal that can be learnt, a great deal of relevance from the past that applies, yes, to the contemporary world and the present. I thank you all for coming out this day, and despite Jim's frequent references to rain, I personally am very thankful that it has not rained on us here today. We'll close by having God Save the Queen.
Attention! Slow, arm. Breathe in, arm.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. God save the Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen. Thank you. This concludes our Vimy Oak planting ceremony for today. Good day.